Hi everyone, it's Flo Tesla. So, I wanted to share my experience with vaccines and why I speak out about vaccines. So, the main reason I speak out about vaccines is because I was fooled. And there's a phrase that says that it's easier to fool a man than to convince a man that he has been fooled. There's an amount of ego that takes place there. We want to believe we made the right decision. We signed for that decision. So when my son was vaccine injured, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it at all right away. In fact, I believed his was genetic because that's what I wanted to believe, right? I didn't want to believe that I had made that decision. God made that decision. Well, I kept vaccinating. So I knew my son had autism at 3 months old. So there were certain behaviors that he had. He was just disconnected from me. I've never been in the presence of somebody disconnected from me. So it was really strange the way that he was. He was very different than my daughter, who was only 13 months older. So I began to notice at that point that things were different. And so I got him diagnosed with autism before he was even 2, and we began ABA. Well, that's when really the um, the fear in me began. Okay, so first of all, I couldn't wrap my head around the autism. I was grieving to a high level of degree. I really couldn't understand why it was happening, and I really couldn't understand my purpose in it. And I kind of went through an identity crisis where I had just started college again because I was a high school dropout at the time when I had my son. So I had started college again, and I mean, the diagnosis hit me so hard that I didn't go to school for a week. But in that week, I did a lot of soul searching, and what I realized was, you know what? When we're sitting at these meetings and we're at IEPs and these experts are making all these decisions for us, I needed to be the expert. I needed the education. I needed to understand what these people were saying, and I needed to know that I was on the same level as them. So I decided at that point, okay, I'm getting my bachelor's degree and I'm figuring this thing out, right? So the next 4 years, I focus on my bachelor's degree. We continue ABA with my son. We continue to vaccinate, and just more and more, I came across more and more autism parents through my son going to school and different things like that. And I came in contact with one autism parent that became very influential in my life. She's one of my best friends, and so she kept telling me that she watched her son regress. She watched her son regress, and for me, nothing like that happened. It was always just a slow progression, you see. And I had the blinders on. I completely had the blinders on, but I had come from a childhood where survival required the blinders to be on at times. So I was used to that, and that was comfortable for me until I got my bachelor's degree. And I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, which is a research major. So the first thing I do is sit down and say, once and for all, I'm going to research these vaccines. So I start researching them, and I research them one by one, ingredient by ingredient, and I start comparing it to what effects it has on the human body because, I got my bachelor's degree. I can understand this stuff. I can read. I know that now, when I was a high school dropout reading this, I would have been like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? But now I'm like, I get this stuff. I can read. I can decipher this stuff. And as I started researching it and then researching the history of it, and then I came to the conclusion that, and I'll tell you honestly, I was biased in my research because I had already made the decision. I had already signed for it, right? So whatever the outcome was, if at the end of it vaccines were bad, I had to take the responsibility for that. And I knew that was another identity crisis that was coming, but it was definitely the elephant in the room. And so I then came to the conclusion that there was not one single vaccine that was beneficial. So that put my world in a whole different tailspin of craziness. And just a year prior, no, not even a year prior, just a couple months prior, I had been in the process, I had experienced severe trauma regarding the death of my grandfather, which I can do a different video on that. But, the different traumas within my life really prompted me and set me in different directions. And so just within the vaccine thing. So here I am now. My son is fully vaccinated at what he is now. He was at that point, I think 10. He was about 10. So at that point when I decided, okay, we're not vaccinating anymore, obviously, but I had to come to the terms and process the fact that I had done that. First of all, I had been fooled. Second of all, I had done that. And third of all, I knew, and I continued on. And not that I knew, because I wouldn't allow myself to know that I knew. Okay, but I did know. I mean, I felt it in my soul. I mean, I had such trauma regarding vaccinations that when my children were vaccinated, I could not be present, which is horrible because I know this is going on. I have to remove myself and allow it to happen. So I'd be in the waiting room crying, praying to God that please intervene. If this is the wrong thing, please intervene. Anyways, he didn't intervene. Not until I decided I was going to intervene that things began to change. So it was at that point that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm being lied to. Anxiety really set in. My faith in the medical profession dwindled to nothingness, to the point where I felt like I was free floating. I had no knowledge because all this time I had relied on someone else having that knowledge. I had relied on the fact that I could go to a doctor and get an expert opinion. Well, now all of that came crashing down. It was almost like I found out that I was adopted. It really, like when I started thinking about it, I was like, gosh, this is what this feels like, to know that your government really isn't on your side. They're really not looking out for you like you've been taught through the school system, through the medical system, through the church system, through all of these different systems that are set up to teach us that the government is here to help us. Well, now I came to the conclusion there's no way I could get around that reasoning. It wasn't here to help us. So I decided that I was going to learn as much as I possibly could in order to figure everything out. So I did. So I changed diet. I sought out natural medicine. I did my due diligence. I researched everything. I found doctors. I found experts. I did everything that I could possibly do to heal my son. And so we changed to the paleo diet for 4 years. Nothing that went in my children's mouth came from anywhere else but my hands. I cooked every meal. I fed them. I made sure it was all organic. We removed all toxins from the home. Completely did a full switch. I mean, to the point where our shower heads have filters on them to avoid being fumigated or, exposed to vapors while taking a shower. So now here we are, toxin-free environment, and all of a sudden my spirituality starts going wild and crazy, and I start feeling like I'm not where I'm supposed to be. My body's healthy. I've overcome fibromyalgia through the diet and different energetic healings that I had received. And so here I am, my body's better than it's ever been, but now my mind will not be quiet. And there's all of this stuff, all this trauma from my grandfather, and now, knowing that I injured my son and all of these different things. So here we are, Heather, in this big ball of madness. And so I end up diving deep into the occult and figuring out that kind of stuff, because that's what leads you to that's where you're led when you start researching everything, and you're like, wait a minute, it's not about money because they have all the money in the world. So it's not about money. It's not about control because they have control as well. What is it about? It's about sustaining them, and we are their food. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are their food. And you can draw it down to a monetary level. They buy their food with the money that they get from us, but ultimately, we are their mind food. And so, throughout all of this, I ended up leaving my husband, really diving deep into the darkness. And then I met a man who really caused me to see my darkness. And for 9 months, I was in a self-imposed hell. And that's when I was completely isolated. I thought I was isolated before, but at least I had my husband. At this point, I was completely isolated and dependent upon a man for everything that I could possibly need. And the man was very okay with me being dependent on everything and had no desire of helping me to get back on my feet. So anyway, so I had to overcome that. I overcame that. My husband and I were able to reconcile, and even after we were able to reconcile, I was still dealing with my emotional addictions to this darkness. So that's what led me into actually controlling my emotions and transmuting my emotions into who I am right now. And I can't believe it. I can see things better than I've ever seen. I can understand things. I don't have any conflict between my mind and my body. And I believe that the whole journey that I went through was so that I could share. You know, I learned about the Kybalion and I started studying the Kybalion, and in the Kybalion, that's the basis for the universal laws. And one of the universal laws is the laws of use. Basically, it says that if you're given knowledge, you're supposed to use that. You're supposed to share that with the people who are ready to hear that. And for those who are not ready to hear it, they will not hear it and they will not understand it no matter what. So if you understand what I'm saying, awesome. If you don't, this message isn't for you. So I'm just sharing my vaccine injury story and where I am now. And I hope I've given some insight to some people. But that's my journey. So I'm just ready to share it, basically, is where I'm at. I really feel I've gotten to the core of what I've been looking for my whole life. And I have never been more of myself than ever. So you'll notice in the beginning of the video, I introduced myself as Flo Tesla, but in the middle of it, I referred to myself as Heather. These are different stages of my life. So Heather was a transition period for me to turn into Flo Tesla, and so that's where I'm at now. I am Flo Tesla, and there is, you know, Heather is a reference point. So I hope that I've been able to reach somebody, and and my message doesn't just go by the wayside. So I'll see you in the next video, though. We'll see you then. Bye bye.